Oh, howdy all, grab yourselves a beer. It is time for some Path of Exile discussion. Today, I'm breaking down the new information that was released about the Heist League into two parts. This video is just going to cover the new and reworked spells and skills, and then the second video will be all of the minor news together. So, having a quick look, the best way to start this is going to be to showcase the video that Grinding Gear Games produced. So, highly recommend having a look at this. I'll just put it through at let's put it through at 1.5 times speed so that it goes really fast, and then we'll discuss it. But it's really important to see these. So this is Blazing Salvo and Intensify. This sort of is its own new skill in a few ways, but it's somewhat of a projectile slash magma orb effect, and you'll see that there's also Flame Wall being used. Crackling Lance here is something that wasn't previously announced. This looks cool. This is Divine Ire meets Arc. There's a central beam of lightning, and it's forking off little bits as well. This looks really impressive, and it also is being used in conjunction with Intensify here. This really looks like it's a great spell with both a single target and area clear abilities. This is the Pinpoint support gem. We'll discuss this later, but basically you start firing less and less projectiles. The first ones you fire a wide spread, then after that you start firing less. Here's Firestorm. This looks cool. This looks like just looks so graphically impactful now. This is also going to kill all of Juices's ridiculous builds that revolve around igniting yourself. And this is Glacial Cascade, being used with mines because, let's face it, that's always been the best way to use Glacial Cascade. And it's looking impressive. The big change being that the last projectile is bigger. Here's Shattering Steel. This doesn't look very impressive, but of course it may be that it clears well. Maybe that it's a fun skill to use, it just doesn't look it. Lancing Steel is again in that same category. It just doesn't seem particularly impactful. But again, let's hold judgment on that until we see the numbers. And here is Splitting Steel, which again is just in that same category of this doesn't have that visceral impact of massive explosion chains all over the screen. Anyway, let's just discuss the mechanic information as well. So firstly, there is Blazing Salvo, which is that new skill that looked almost a bit like Magma Orb. This feels in a lot of ways. If you're familiar with the skill Blade Flurry, this is mechanically very different. I mean, Blade Flurry is an attack, but one of the things with Blade Flurry is that it's a very high skill cap skill. And what I mean by that is that if you give it to two different players and give them exactly the same gear, the one that is more knowledgeable about how the mechanics of it work and that can more tightly execute those mechanics will get much better performance than someone that just mashes buttons on their keyboard or their mouse. So Blazing Salvo feels like it's in that category as well. High skill cap skills. So it releases a torrent of fiery mortars that can hit enemies as they fly and then land in rapid succession. Each mortar causes an explosion. When targeting up close, these explosions can hit a target multiple times, while targeting at long range causes them to spread out and affect a wider area, but deal less damage, or at least not have the potential to double, triple dip damage on a single target. The skill rewards clever positioning, making it well suited to casting by hand or being careful about placement of totems, traps, and mines. And I think that if you are going to try and make Blazing Salvo work, you probably are going to want to cast this skill yourself. Multiple projectile supports result in more damage up close and more reliable area spread, aka you probably want to use this with Awaken greater multiple projectiles as a stretch goal at endgame and with greater multiple projectiles until then. And Fork, on the other hand, lets the mortars split into two if they hit enemies, with each exploding separately. Combine the skill with Void Sphere to draw enemies in for a concentrated salvo. Really like that idea of a 1-2 punch, where your Void Sphere is just being used for utility rather than for damage. I've done this occasionally with Decoy Totem and Ignite Proliferation in the past. It certainly works. Or use Flame Wall to add fire damage to Blazing Salvo, whilst applying the Flame Wall's burning effect to enemies hit. So Crackling Lance was the second one, and that was the one that I mentioned was a hybrid of Arc and Divine Ire. It shoots out a wide beam of lightning that has secondary areas of lightning that split off it, striking enemies in a wide spread. Crackling Lance comes with built-in intensity. So Intensify is a support gem that causes your first cast of a spell to act normal, or well, to do increased area, but then you start sacrificing area on second and subsequent casts while you stand your ground. So if you stand your ground and keep casting the same spell repeatedly with Intensify, the first one hits full area, actually more than full area, and does normal damage. The second one hits a tighter area and does more damage. Third one hits a tighter area still and does more damage still. And then the fourth and subsequent hit a very tight area, but do massively increased damage. That's quite an interesting support gem that was added a couple of leagues ago. Hasn't seen a huge amount of use, but it is good enough to use. So Crackling Lance comes with built-in intensity, so each cast builds in damage, while the secondary areas angle in until all the lightning fires in a single wider beam. So essentially what this means is that as long as you're staying mobile, you're going to be spreading damage out across large areas of the screen. But once you stop being mobile, once you stop being mobile, once you stand your ground, you can then build up to very powerful single target bursts. This will perform really well, I expect, on heavy boss encounters, whilst being less effective in encounters where there's multiple bosses at once and you want to apply damage to all three of them at once. So an example where this will not be a good mechanic will be something like the Courtyard boss. So the Courtyard boss, you're basically fighting 3 Rogue Exile type bosses at one time. And an example where it will be really good would be pretty much any other boss in the game, especially ones that don't move all that much, and that you can safely find somewhere to stand your ground at a distance. This also synergizes with a number of the area control skills that were revealed earlier this week. So this should be a lot of fun. This skill has powerful single target damage capacity when handcast, self-cast. I hate the term handcast, sorry GGG, but stop trying to make handcast happen, it's not going to happen. Whilst having reliable area coverage when used with triggers, totems, traps, or mines. Damage bonus is multiplicative when used in conjunction with the intensity support, allowing it to build up incredible single target damage. And its high damage is great for creating very powerful shocks on enemies. So again, a lot going for this. This sounds like an interesting thing. In terms of high single target damage causing shocks on enemies is one thing, but shocks aren't the only thing you can do with a lot of damage. Another thing you might want to consider, and this is something that's for a medium budget setup of the build. If you can acquire 2 copies of the Call of the Brotherhood unique ring, you can turn all of that juicy lightning damage into cold damage instead. Or at least it'll be 4% lightning, 96% cold, assuming that you can afford all the necessary catalysts. At this point, you can inflict devastating freezes on enemies. Freezing enemies is a really powerful defensive measure, and sometimes is just better than having the original lightning damage. Or alternately, there's also a number of Cluster Jewel specific nodes that reward both shocking and chilling on the same build. And so there's a lot of different ways to build around with Crackling Lance. You might even consider using only 1 copy of Call of the Brotherhood and using it in conjunction with the Cluster Jewel node that gives 10% additional, I think it's 10% additional lightning damage to chilled enemies, or maybe it's 10% additional of your lightning damage is added as extra cold damage against shocked enemies. There's things like that will just add a lot of extra damage and that you can potentially get a few of. So lots to think about with Crackling Lance, and I'm giving it some thought as a league starter. It also has just so many endgame possibilities as well. Damage conversion shenanigans, a trickster that uses damage conversion to scale up lots and lots of chaos damage via the Harness the Void in the Trickster Ascendancy. There's a lot going for it, and I'm keen to see what we can do with it. The key, though, is to temper your expectations until we get hard numbers, because there have been skills in the past that looked amazing until we got the hard numbers and they weren't. Okay, Intensity and the Pinpoint support. Intensity was introduced as a high-risk, high-reward mechanic for self-casting that lets you build up powerful, concentrated damage while casting repeatedly, as long as you didn't move and at cost of area of effect. To improve the mechanic, we're lowering the base maximum intensity to 3, while increasing all bonuses to compensate. This will make it faster to build up and lose intensity, while also putting more power on the passive tree notable that grants maximum intensity. We're also changing the intensity mechanic to be one which we can build into other skills and supports, like Crackling Lance and the new Pinpoint support. Pinpoint support, this looks cool. This is a +3 additional projectiles, but each stack of intensity reduces the number of projectiles you fire by 1, while greatly increasing the spell's damage. By increasing your maximum intensity, you could lose all projectiles. So this support works very well with spells that can easily gain multiple projectiles. So that means there's a number of skills that fire 1 projectile by default, then there's ones that fire 2 or 3. You're going to want something that fires a few more. Additionally, we'll need to see with Pinpoint support, the thing that immediately jumped to my mind, and I don't know if this is possible or not, Pinpoint support may be spell only, in which case this doesn't work, but Pinpoint support in conjunction with Power Siphon is exactly where I start going when I see this mechanic. It sounds like it'd be incredibly powerful with Power Siphon if the mechanics can be made to work together. Next up we have Firestorm, which no longer causes a rain of fire on enemies. It causes a monstrous meteor to just slam out of the sky into them, and then after the meteor hits, there's a bunch of little bits of the old school Firestorm there. So this has been reworked to have more powerful visuals, definitely, more reliable area coverage, and a greater reward for casting fewer, more powerful Firestorms. It's now level 28 skill, increased from level 12. So what they mean by that is that the minimum level of the gem is level 28. This will be a reward for killing General Gravicius on some classes, and on other classes, the first opportunity you'll have to get this will be the library quest, the optional quest in Act 3. Firestorm now calls down a single powerful meteor, followed by a smaller ongoing storm of fire over a duration. It now has a limit on how many ongoing storms can be active at once. This is probably for the best because I remember just how screen melting it was running Firestorm on my old PC. And you just start blasting Firestorms and suddenly you're running the game at 5 frames per second. And honestly, I don't think my current PC could handle real Firestorm spam. So you can call down as many meteors as you like, but you can't stack up the ongoing Firestorms by extending their duration and triggering or casting the skill rapidly. This has allowed us to greatly increase the area of each impact and the overall damage per cast, and improves performance. The Ice Storm is next, and this is a skill that only comes from the Whispering Ice. It's received a visual overhaul to modernize the skill, while also receiving some balance changes. It has a storm limit like Firestorm, although the limit is much higher than it is for Firestorms, so it works better with triggering and rapid cast mechanics. When they're talking about rapid cast mechanics, they're pretty much talking about cast while channeling linked to Cyclone. That's one of the ways that this has been used in the past. Its impact area of effect and damage has been increased, while the impact frequency has also been lowered. So got to see this in practice, but ultimately a graphical overhaul for this skill has long been needed. A lot of people have said that they've been keen to play with the Whispering Ice, especially given it's such an easy, unique item to source. Usually all you need to do is run 5 or 6 Burial Chambers maps and you have a set of the Divination card that grants it. So unfortunately though, the PC requirements were really high. It was absolutely brutal on any medium-end computer, and hopefully that's fixed. Discharge. Discharge is another long-standing Path of Exile skill that hasn't received much balance attention due to how dependent it's been on specific mechanics that can rapidly generate charges. And so with Discharge, the way that it works currently is that when you cast a spell, or more usually when you trigger the spell, it detonates all of your power, endurance, and frenzy charges at once. Each power charge you have deals a massive amount of lightning damage. Each frenzy charge you have deals a massive amount of cold, and each endurance charge you have deals a massive amount of fire. Builds tend to get as many of each charge as they can reasonably, and use, or often they ignore the frenzy charges actually, and then they use the unique amulet Vol's Devotion, and various other sources of rapid generation of power charges. This allows them to have one detonation consume all their power charges. Vol's Devotion then generates lots of endurance charges, and then those endurance charges are ready for the next use, and you're regenerating your power charges via other means. So what they're doing here is that to make the skill more accessible, Discharge's base damage has been almost tripled, and its area of effect now scales significantly with the number of charges consumed, but it's been given a short cooldown. This makes keeping up on charge generation much more manageable for a wider selection of builds. Its damage penalty, while triggered, has been replaced by a damage penalty to ailments, as it can now create a very devastating Knight. So this will be really interesting to see. Discharge has always been one of those skills that is a lot of fun if you can make it work, but that does not work until you're well established at endgame. And now maybe it might be something that a Guardian build that uses the charge generation node on the Guardian may well be able to generate charges via some other means, possibly Cyclone, and then cast a massive discharge once they've got a bunch of charges built up. However, to preserve the classic trigger discharge playstyle, a new threshold jewel called Endless Misery has been added, which sets the cooldown of discharge to a much lower value, but also comes with penalties to its damage and area of effects, bringing it closer to, although superior in many setups, the current iteration of discharge. This is a cool idea. So essentially, if you've liked the way that it's played in the past, you're going to be able to pick up an Endless Misery and still play it that way, pretty much that way anyway. If, on the other hand, you want to try the new discharge, you just don't use Endless Misery, and you play around with the skill and see how it goes. I definitely think that Guardian is the ascendancy of choice for this at the moment, although I'm very open to being proven wrong. Guardians just generate so many charges that it's just not funny, and they can do that via a number of means, whether that be wand attacks, whether it be by casting various spells that hit lots and lots of targets, such as Ball Lightning. Lots of ways that they can do it. These will generate an enormous amount of charges, and then they can detonate a very powerful discharge. Additionally, Guardians can be tanky enough to get close enough for a discharge to go off, and then of course you can scale discharge either on its hit damage or on its ignite damage. We'll have to see the hard numbers to see which one's better. Glacial Cascade now has additional mechanics that provide a unique playstyle that rewards clever positioning. The skill now has inherent knockback, a fixed cascade spread, and the final burst of the cascade deals significantly more damage in a larger area. So this is now a medium to long range skill, whereas previously Glacial Cascade had been something that was of roughly equal power at short range, or at medium range, or at long range. Now it's going to be much more of a longer range skill. Use the knockback from the cascade to push enemies away and into the big impact, and position the skill carefully on bosses to make the most of the damage overlap. Again, this is a high skill cap, so if you've got the skill to do, say, Blade Flurry execution, this could be really good. The skill now deals significant damage with traps and mines. Still deals significant damage with traps and mines, but can now take much more advantage of the deliberate positioning that totems and self-casting allows. Skill benefits greatly from increased area of effect, allowing for more overlap between bursts. We've also changed the skill to convert 100% of its physical damage to cold natively, so no enchantment or threshold jewel is required to fully convert the skill. This is a huge change. There's a huge upgrade on it being 60% base conversion, and we'll still have all of the same available shenanigans with various other things that you could have done previously, like one of the essence crafted mods on a helmet would add 50% of physical damage added as extra lightning. That's still an option for scaling Glacial Cascade, but additionally you pick up so many more options and you're no longer as dependent on the 40% conversion enchantment. We're replacing the enchantment and disabling the Long Winter Threshold Jewel from dropping, to be reintroduced in a new form later. Splitting Steel is a new low-level skill that uses the shard mechanic and looked really underwhelming in my opinion on that video. So each use fires a single shard that explodes into additional projectiles when it hits an enemy or reaches the targeted location, creating smaller shards that fly towards nearby enemies before detonating in smaller explosions. The skill has some added physical damage and a chance to impale, something you couldn't previously get at low levels. So I had previously liked the look of this skill. It's just lost its appeal to me. That said, it may turn out to be good. I'm not suggesting it's a bad skill, just that it doesn't have any immediate appeal to me. This is the big news here though. Changes have been made to the split mechanic that means that splitting now occurs before other projectile behaviors. This means that Fork, Pierce, and Chain will take place after split has generated all the additional projectiles, opening up all sorts of interesting ways to essentially to project damage in new ways. This is kind of cool, and I'm definitely going to have a look at all of the different things that can cause projectiles to split, because some of them are probably going to find some uses. Fury Valve, from memory, was a unique ring in the Metamorph League. I think that may have some sort of mechanical ability to split projectiles. So I've got to just look into that and work out what can be done with it, because having the ability to cause projectiles to split first, then fork, then chain, that's going to be quite interesting. Additionally, you split first even before piercing. Call of Steel is a new secondary skill granted as long as you have any of the Steel skill gems equipped. It lets you detonate all impales on enemies in a very large range, causing them to basically instantly consume all of the stored impale damage and to detonate it in an explosion around them. This also includes dead enemies whose corpses are impaled. That is really useful. This gives you a way to essentially get a benefit that's not too dissimilar to Herald of Ash, but to get it onto a build that is set up for purely physical damage. This is an impressive ability for those builds to have. Call of Steel also generates shards that can be used by other Steel skills, generating 1 for every impaled enemy in range, as well as 4 shards when first used, then every 4 for another per half a second until you're at the maximum of 12. Using a Steel skill will interrupt this ongoing recharge, so you want to time it carefully. Shattering Steel has received some changes to make it more flexible, at the cost of consuming 2 shards. Shattering Steel projectiles no longer hit the same target multiple times, but instead deal much more damage up close while they are consuming shards, so while you've got shards to consume. The skill now has 4 additional projectiles instead of 2, and proj damage is now more reliably modified by... proj distance is now more affected by proj speed. Projectiles still explode in a cone area when they stop, and these areas can hit a target multiple times if you can make them overlap. Skill now grants buffs that give a chance to block whenever you use them while consuming a shard, and you can have up to 6 of these buffs that grant block chance at once. This is interesting. This is a new way to potentially cap block chance much earlier and at much lower gear levels than you otherwise can. Block chance is an incredibly powerful defensive layer if you can scale enough of it, and so this could be really good. But you've got to keep using the skill frequently to keep the bonus active, and you've also got to manage your shards as well, because you've got Call of Steel providing you shards. This gives a sizable defensive advantage to keep you alive while getting up close and personal. Lancing Steel has been completely reworked. Using the attack now consumes 4 shards, creating a whirling cluster of shards pointing forward. The cluster rapidly fires out its projectiles, aiming towards enemies in front at great range, or enemies in any direction close to the cluster. The projectiles target enemies the cluster hasn't hit first, letting the cluster pick off weaker enemies before focusing on remaining targets. The projectiles deal more damage to targets that haven't yet been hit by each cluster of shards, make the skill more effective at taking out very large groups of spread out enemies. So this is a really complex skill. I think honestly can't really judge just by the wording here. It needs to be tested out. But you'll also, they're saying that because of the high shard cost, you're going to have to invest in chance to impale so that you've got more shards in enemies to draw out with Call of Steel. This sounds intriguing. It wasn't looking graphically all that incredible when we had a look at it here, but let's just have another look at it, at the mechanics of it. And you'll see, like, there's projectiles flying everywhere, but I think there's other skills that do the projectiles flying everywhere a little bit better, like Tornado Shot. So I'm not excited by this skill, but who knows? I could very well be wrong. It could end up being one of the top meta ones. So in terms of the things that most excite me, I really like the look of Crackling Lance. This is something I'm going to, at least once the numbers on the gem come out, I'm going to at least seriously consider this as a league starter. Blazing Salvo looks very interesting as well. But I don't like the apparent lack, like the fact that it seems to only be a forward-facing attack, forward-facing projectile skill. I do like projectile skills that can hit behind you when you need them to. Just otherwise you need to move the mouse so rapidly. Obviously Crackling Lance also is like that, but Crackling Lance, that feels right for the skill. It feels like you're sort of charging up and firing a laser, very much like Divine Ire. I like the thoughts of Intensify and Pinpoint support. Just got to test them out in practice. Firestorm's graphics look amazing. I don't know if the skill will be good or not. Ice Storm changes will be something that need to be seen in practice. Discharge, I really like the idea of the changes, and I hope it turns out that both styles of play are viable, both with and without Endless Misery. Glacial Cascade, I've been burnt by this skill before and don't really intend to give it another shot so quickly, but by all means, give it a go, prove me wrong. And the Steel skills, I've got to say, I'm just not that excited by. Anyways, they're my thoughts. Hope you enjoy playing around with these skills, and I'm going to leave it there. Have a good one.